Happy birthday
Was
to you.
That's it.
Happy birthday, Josh.
Did you know that recently the people who made that song sued the television company because they made a film in which people sang Happy Birthday. The family of the people who made the song sued for copyrights.
Oh, really?
Well, it's all about the.
They're right.
So your parents want you to be a budding. What's it? Apologist or polemicist.
I really don't like the terms polemicist or apologist. You know why? It's just applied by anyone to people who are defending their own views.
Yeah. So
it has this negative connotation.
Speaker's Corner, Rabbi Tovia Singer.
Like, I wouldn't consider you an apologist, even though you're defending Christianity. Because you're just defending Christianity, right? You shouldn't be called an apologist for that.
I think apologist has to be someone who's defending his own actions. Pangs of guilt. He feels a little bit deep down. He feels he's doing something wrong. Therefore, he comes up with a defence. That's being an apologist.
Well, I mean, people just say
apology. What's an apology?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know the kind of the beginning of the word, but I guess that's just what.
Also, NASA launched a ship called Apology.
Really? Okay.
Apology.
Interesting. So,
Alphame's humour.
So you two can be, you can call it Todavia in the corner.
What do you mean? What?
Rabbi Todavia Singer.
Oh, Tovia Singer.
Tovia Singer. You like the speaker's corner?
It's already got a channel. We've got a channel now.
Yeah, I know. Jews in the corner. I saw it. You sent it to me.
Jews at the corner.
So you're going to be like here regularly every week?
That's
kind
the plan,
of.
Although it seems like we're being shut down next week.
Yeah, unfortunately. How long are you going to be around
At least
for?
this time we've got a deadline.
Well, I finished yeshiva, so.
Well, but they might extend it. That's the whole problem. Is they always say that, so it doesn't.
The last time there was a lockdown, it was just indefinite.
Well, that's the thing is, I feel like they don't want to get people in uproar, so they'll say it's going to be a month, and then they will start extending it.
Yeah, obviously they're going to do that. They did it the first time.
Exactly.
No, last time they didn't give us a time.
No, they said it would be 9 weeks.
I don't remember any deadline. Are you gonna? How long are you in the UK then?
I'm in here for until the Messiah comes. See.
Oh really?
Yeah.
when the first lockdown began,
until the Messiah comes.
When COVID began, people said that COVID will not last long.
Yeah.
It was made in China.
Well, now we know. Now that's I heard that joke.
Yeah, you need to be quick with Avromi. You need to be quick with Avromi.
That's it. It's the Jewish sense of humour. That's why there's so many entertainers who are Jewish. It's the wit.
You know, a man goes on a date, but he has to keep social distancing. So I said, "How did it go?" He says, "Oh yes, it was nice to meet her."
The face of the last one to get any.
I didn't get that. Say it again.
So a guy goes on a date.
Yeah.
But he has to keep social distancing.
Yeah.
I said to him, "How did it go?" And he said, "Yes, it was nice to meet her."
Nice to meet you.
To meet ya.
To meet you.
2 meters.
Oh, okay, yeah.
There's loads and loads of these jokes. There's a whole pandemic of it.
Pandemic. I have a feeling I've been turning this the wrong way.
No, but it's not in the hole. You're not even putting it in the hole.
No, it is in the hole.
No, look, you have to put the screw bits. You see.
Well, it's new.
I've just looked at it and I've already figured it out in like 2 seconds.
You're pro at these kind of things. If only you could be like this with the Tanakh.
Well, it seems like you are like this with your Talmud and the Tanakh.
Oh, I've got your stuff on that. Don't you worry.
All right.
I mean, you should be worried.
Okay, on the roof rabba and stuff like that.
Fighting talk.
Okay. Whoa. Have you got an answer for the roof rabba and stuff?
I do.
Okay.
Josh, do you want to record this? Download this from.
Nothing like the great outdoors. Look all the. Have you been pilfering hatuns? Have you been posing as hatun to get the flowers?
In the conversation.
Because she said,
And then he can film.
Oh, okay, fine.
What's that?
If he's alright with that.
Yeah.
I would like him to be in the combo as well.
Okay.
Why do I need to be?
To get your opinion.
and then I'll be your wingman, paperboy. I'll scream in verse.
Even when I was reading it,
2 birds with 1 stone.
I was like, I'm reading it, I'm like this. I'm like this. Yeah, it's a joke. You didn't work with the right intention. How are you gonna get with good potential? We have to move.
Well, I think here's okay because they're like the pier's still open, isn't it? So
Keep that safe.
was all.
That's the cap for the way the microphone goes. I don't know how I need to get this on. Maybe paperboy. Maybe you know how this will go on the front. It's to do with glare, although I don't know if there's going to be any glare.
Yeah, well, I don't think you need this. Not now, anyway.
Alright, then in that case, we're not going to bother with this.
Yeah.
What's this piece?
Yeah, well, this is the thing that for where
Oh,
the
and
microphone
microphone
goes.
as well.
Yeah.
So, have your family seen your videos then?
Oh yeah.
Okay, nice.
I think it's hilarious.
Who is this paper boy? Ah, look who it is.
I'm standing up for Jesus. This is my bro. I heard your story, man. I'm not even engaged with the story. No, I don't.
Thank you.
What kind of rubbish security is this? You come after everyone's gone.
Where's
You
your
two,
mask,
I said
Where's
you.
your mask?
I said you two were supposed to be
instead.
like here, like at the beginning. You just come like.
We just come from church, innit?
Okay.
Ah,
No,
look
I
at you
don't know.
putting the church card on you.
No, I don't know. I didn't. See
Toby
that.
Robinson.
I was like over
got
there. They were over
I
there.
think you got released.
Yeah. Oh no.
Right. Let's roll now. It's rolling now, by the way. So whenever you guys are ready.
Oh, let him just.
It's recording.
Explanation. I don't have the arrogance. No. Oh, you don't know. That childish thing. So you're trying to say I know.
But it's recording, isn't it? Just keep it up. Wait. What about this one?
The only thing you from me, get that vibe and go to Jesus. Don't go to a man in Ghana, my brother. Trust me. Don't go to a man in Ghana.
Ah, you see, didn't tighten, Josh. Ah, you see, that's like your handling of the Tanakh.
Oh yeah.
Alright, guys. Okay, rolling now.
Okay, so today we're going to continue our discussion that I left off with Josh last week. So to recap, if people didn't watch the video we did last week, I started off with looking at Islam, and the purpose of bringing up Islam was to look at the claims that Islam makes and whether it's truth claims. So we looked at some of the passages and some of the hadiths to see if there was any Jewish recollection of some of the stories about it. And Josh confirmed that there was no Jewish text within Judaism that affirmed these stories. And the reason I brought this up was not for point scoring, but just to establish how do we get to truth. Truth has to be based on things that we can establish as fact. So it would seem strange if a book makes claims about certain people and those people don't remember any of the stories about it. So then I use a comparison with Christianity, that the claims that Christians make can be taken from the Tanakh and can even be associated with some of the claims made by rabbis. Now, with Josh, he brought up some of the opinions from rabbis. And what we find is that when we look at the Tanakh in plain reading, it's very clear as to what it says. Then Josh will go to the interpretation of the rabbis and say it can be very difficult to understand the Midrash and the Talmud and so forth. But if we have an oral law from God, and this oral law is an explanation of the Tanakh, it seems very strange that it's very difficult to understand the explanation of the Tanakh. Now, there's even a saying as
the Tanakh or the Talmud?
Of the oral law is the explanation of the Tanakh.
Yes.
So, in going with this, even as my friend here was saying some of his jokes, there's a saying: how many Jews does it take to change a light bulb? The answer is 30. 1 to change the light bulb, and 29 to discuss and give 29 contradictory ways to change the light bulb. And this is exactly how one understands the oral law, because when we've looked at some of the statements by these rabbis, they seem to contradict themselves. And as we go through this discussion again,
Themselves,
each other. So if they are explaining what the Tanakh says, why would they then be contradicting each other? Josh gave the answer in a previous discussion that all answers must be true in a metaphysical way, but even if the statements appear contradictory. So what we're going to do, we're going to continue where we left off.
Sometimes you can get two things
Yes.
which might appear to be contradictions,
Okay.
but then you hear a whole explanation as to how they don't contradict each other at all.
Okay. And I'll pass it just to if you want to give your client opening statements, and then we can continue where we left off last week.
All right. So welcome back, everyone. Here with Paperboy again, as he just said, and he brought up various rabbinical texts last week in an effort to try to very nice. In an effort to try and prove that the rabbis think that Isaiah 53 is about the Messiah, which of course we know is not the case. And he brought up at the end of last time a medrash from Ruth Rabbah, and in Ruth Rabbah, he found it quotes Isaiah 53, and he said, look, it's using it as a proof for something about the Messiah having suffering, right? So now what we're going to do is we're going to have a look, analyze this medrash, and see if it really proves what Paperboy thinks it does, that the rabbis in the old texts used to say that this chapter was about the Messiah. And we're going to see that this does not actually prove what Paperboy thinks it does at all.
Okay, so, and also, when we go on from that, I will bring up other verses that Christians use to establish the understanding that Christ would have been the Messiah. Because if I ask you, how do people come to the conclusion that a verse is messianic?
How do people? Well, it depends which people.
The rabbis.
The rabbis.
Yeah.
The rabbis come to the conclusion about which verse is messianic if it's talking about something that will happen in the end of days, if it's talking about something that will happen at the redemption, these kind of things.
Okay, so now, if that is the criteria, and what we'll go through is looking at why other rabbis understood certain verses that you now reject as messianic. Because that's why I'm asking, what is the criteria? Because as we go with Isaiah, we start with Isaiah 53, you brought up Jonathan ben Uzel,
yes,
who was a very renowned rabbi.
Yes.
Now, he understood this verse as messianic. And this is why I asked you that question. What is the criteria for someone to determine whether a verse is messianic or not?
Well, it depends. Are you talking about messianic in the simple sense of the verse in context, or you're talking about whether or not they consider it, whether they can use it in an exegetical way, in a drush kind of way, and I've explained drush in previous videos, to illustrate a point. So we know that Jonathan ben Uziel, his commentary, his Targum, is really an exegetical type of commentary. It's not a literal translation of the text by any means. And therefore, when Jonathan ben Uziel looks at various chapters and sees that sometimes it says, my servant Israel, and sometimes it doesn't, he will take the place that it doesn't as an inference that this will not be Israel, and therefore he'll say that those are Messiah. But what's interesting about Jonathan ben Uziel on Isaiah 53 is that he switches from the servant being the Messiah straight away in verse 52:14 to talking about that the sufferer is the house of Israel, and he continues through the end of the chapter that sometimes it seems like the servant is the nations, sometimes it seems to him that the servant is the people of Israel, and sometimes it seems it's the Messiah. But never in Jonathan ben Uziel do we see a Messiah suffering for sins, and never in any rabbinical commentary have we ever seen anything about the Messiah dying for sins.
Okay, so if we look at his translation again, I'll start from verse 5.
Of course.
And it says, therefore he shall pray for our sins.
Wait, why are you starting from verse 5? You should start from 52:13. You don't want to do that?
No, because you made the statement about that point, so I just want to get to the crux of the points where it refers to dying for the sins, or the chastisements for sins, rather than starting again from the beginning, because I just want to focus on that part and what it says. So it says, therefore he shall pray for our sins, and our iniquities his sake shall be forgiven us, for we are considered crushed, smitten of the Lord, and afflicted. He shall build the house of the sanctuary, which has been profaned on the account of our sins. He was delivered over on account of our iniquities, and through his doctrine peace shall be multiplied upon us, and through the teaching of his words our sins shall be forgiven us. All we like sheep have been scattered, every one of us has turned to his own way. It pleased the Lord to forgive the sins of us for his sake. He shall pray and shall be answered, yea, therefore he shall open his mouth, he shall be heard. He shall deliver over the mighty of the nations and the lamb to the slaughter, and like a So, a bit lost. 8.
I don't have the title in here. I love how you're using that book. There was
As
me-
opposed to, sorry.
There was me thinking last week you had unique arguments. Turns out these all came from Driver and Neuberger's book in the 1870s.
I've never read that book, but I'll
This is
continue.
the book you're holding right now.
Oh, with the
Yes.
the translation,
Yeah.
not the argument. Anyway, we'll continue. And like a sheep before his shearers is dumb, none shall in his presence open his mouth or speak a word. Actually, it's before in verse 4 and 5 where it speaks about the.
Oh dear, you really have confused yourself this time.
Okay, no, let me continue from 9. Sorry.
Okay.
He shall gather our captives from affliction and pain, and who shall be able to narrate the wonderful works which shall be done for us in his days. He shall remove the rule of the nations from the land of Israel, the sins which my people have commanded and have come upon them. And he shall deliver the wicked into hell and the riches of the treasures, and they got by violence into death of Abaddon, that they who commit sin shall not remain, that they should not speak of folly with their mouth. And it was the pleasure of the Lord to refine and purify the remnant of his people, in order to clean their souls from sin, that they might see the kingdom of the Messiah, that their sons and daughters might multiply and prolong the days, and those who kept the law of the Lord shall prosper through his pleasure. So here we see that this person is praying for the sins and taking the iniquities, and that for his sake the nation shall be forgiven.
Yes,
but
for
we
his sake.
also see, because it talks about one who is righteous, and we also know in Isaiah he condemns Israel as being sinful.
Yes.
So therefore, if Israel is sinful, it cannot be the one who is without sin.
Well, where does it say he's without sin? doesn't
For
say that.
his righteousness.
Righteousness does not mean without sin.
So
As it says in Ecclesiastes,
Sorry, yeah.
there is no righteous man on
Right.
earth who does good and does not sin.
right,
Inside the
so
Ecclesiastes,
Israel was not
Ecclesiastes.
considered righteous, because Isaiah even condemned the nation as a whole, because they were blaspheming the Lord, because they
They
were
were worshipping idols.
exactly. So the nation cannot be the one who was righteous to redeem itself. It had to be someone else who was defined, and this is why.
Even within the nation, there's always different factors.
But that's why I said this cannot be the nation of Israel, because it's speaking.
Well,
he's saying it's
why
speaking as the
don't you
nation
now
as a whole.
Within
Why
the
don't you
nation of
go
Israel, you
before
get some people who are on the path.
A remnant, right? That would be the Messiah, the righteous
It can be all the
one.
people who are on the path.
But Isaiah condemned the nation as being unrighteous.
Because the nation has in its
Exactly.
righteous elements and
So the
unrighteous.
nation cannot be righteous to redeem themselves, because they were condemned as unrighteous by Isaiah himself.
Because you've got different factions within the nation.
So then it cannot be the nation itself. That's the point. You're trying to say it's a remnant within the nation,
The righteous remnant of the nation. This is what most rabbinic commentaries have said.
but then you've said that Isaiah 53 is talking about the nation, not
Yes,
a remnant.
Look, what we're talking about is, we're
Yes.
talking about the servant of God.
Yes.
Okay? Now, obviously, somebody who doesn't serve God is not going to be called the servant of God. Nobody thinks that. There's no rabbi who's ever said such a thing. That it even includes the wicked of Israel. Nobody thinks that. Obviously, it's talking about the righteous of Israel when it says, my servant. Right? And in fact, if you look every single place where verses in Isaiah 53 are quoted, they're quoted to talk about righteous people. So whether or not it's quoted to talk about Rabbi Akiva, as it is in the Yerushalmi, in Maseches Shkolim 21a, or whether or not it's taken to be used about Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses our teacher, in various midrashim, or whether or not it's taken to talk about the Messiah in Ruth Rabbah, and in indeed the Targum, or whether or not it's talking about anyone who has been given troubles by God, Yisurim, right, like it does in Tractate Brachos 5a, right? There's so many different things. There's one medrash in the Sifrei in Bamidbar Rabbah, repeated in Sifrei Bamidbar, and it's repeated in Sifrei Devarim, where it quoted as referring to Pinchas ben Elazar, Phineas, the son of Elazar, the priest, right, grandson of Aaron. So we see what's the rabbis. What are they saying? They're saying that this passage refers to the righteous of Israel. And we can apply this to individual righteous people within Israel. And that's what we see throughout rabbinic teaching.
So it's gone from the nation as a whole to a remnant.
Well, when I said a nation as a whole, I never thought that anyone would actually think that I was referring to the wicked ones as well. When we talk about Jews, we should not be talking about those who do not believe in Judaism and who do not practice Judaism. That would be like saying that a Christian can be somebody who does not believe Jesus to be the Messiah, or a Muslim can be somebody who does not believe Muhammad to be a prophet. That is obviously absurd.
So there are 2 points to add to that. So then obviously we went to the Ruth Rabbah, where it says the Messiah and he will eat the world to come. The 5th explanation for come here is King Messiah. Come here, this is draw near to kingship and eat from the bread, and this is the bread of kingship, and deep your morsel in the vinegar. This is his chastisement, as it is said, but he was wounded for our transgression. Now adding this to also, again, why would Jonathan ben Uzel, who is one of the most influential rabbis, be confused into thinking that, or describing it as a singular person, and then attributing the verse to the Messiah as well, verse 12.
So, what you're asking is a good question, and I'm going to answer your question. But in order to do that, we need to do a little bit of an exercise here. Yeah, I'm going to ask you about various verses in the Tanakh, and ask you what you think the simple meaning of their verses are.
Okay.
So first of all, Zechariah, I'd like you to turn to Zechariah, chapter 14, verse 2. And I'd like you to tell me what you think the verse is talking about. And then we'll see how the Medrash uses it.
Okay, Zechariah 13.
Chapter 14, verse 2. It might be slightly different in the Christian version. I know that
14:2.
the Jewish version will have it different. What
For
does it
I will
say?
gather the nations
Yeah,
against Jerusalem to battle, and city shall be taken, and the houses plundered, and the women raped. Half of the... So,
Now, what do you think that verse is talking about?
behold, the day is coming for the Lord when the... This is talking about... Sorry. Behold, the day is coming for the Lord when the spoil taken from you will be divided in your midst. For I will gather all the nations against Jerusalem to battle, and the city shall be taken, and the houses plundered, and the women raped. So wasn't this talking about the exile? No, this was... we would say there's 2 different verses,
Yeah.
two different understandings, but I won't go into the second Christian interpretation.
Are any of the interpretations that you would believe are the simple understanding of these verses here talking about kingship being taken away from the Messiah? Do you see that anywhere in these verses?
No.
No. Well, lo and behold, the Medrash, straight after the part that you quoted,
Yeah.
says kingship will be taken away from him, the Messiah, for a while, as it is stated, and it then quotes chapter 14, verse 2 of Zechariah.
So within the Midrash...
Hold on.
Okay.
Then the Medrash does something else. Well, could you please turn to something we can both agree is a messianic prophecy?
Okay.
Isaiah chapter 11.
So Isaiah...
Chapter 11. We all agree, Christians and Jews all agree that this is a messianic prophecy. Right?
There shall come forth
Right.
a shoot from the stump of Jesse, and a branch from his root shall bear fruit.
Yes.
And the Spirit of the Lord shall rest upon him.
Yes.
And the Spirit of wisdom and understanding, and the Spirit of counsel and might, the Spirit of knowledge and the fear of the Lord. And his delight shall be in the fear of the Lord.
Yes.
Continue.
Continue.
He shall not judge by what his eyes see, or decide disputes by what his ears hear, but with righteousness he shall judge the poor, and decide with equity for the meek of the earth. And he shall strike the earth with the rod of his mouth, and with the breath of his lips he shall kill the wicked.
Okay, now stop there. Now that last verse, verse 4, what do you think that's talking about?
Verse 4.
Yes, verse 4 that you just read.
But with righteousness he shall judge the poor, and decide with equity the meek from the earth, and he shall strike the earth with a rod of his mouth. So this is obviously talking about judgment.
Yes.
That the Messiah.
Do you see any evidence from the words, and he shall strike the land with the rod of his mouth, anything to do with kingship being restored to the Messiah?
From verse 4.
Yeah, from verse 4. Do you see
Well, if
any...
it doesn't. It talks about him judging.
Yeah,
so then we would
nothing
have
to do with kingship, right? Nothing to do with kingship being returned to the Messiah. Nothing
Yes.
to do with that.
But even
Now,
before-
the Medrash, in the next line after it quotes from Zechariah, then says kingship was restored to him, the Messiah.
Okay.
As it says, and then it quotes the words from chapter 11, verse 4 in Isaiah, and he shall strike the land with the rod of his mouth. Now, this all shows us something very important, and this is something that I wanted to talk to you about today. Medrash, also known as Aggadah, is not something which takes verses literally, does not take verses in context. Medrash, Aggadah, is a form of storytelling that explores ethics and values in biblical texts. In fact, the word Aggadah means story or telling in Hebrew.
Yeah, go
Right?
on.
You didn't see this one coming, did you?
Go on.
Medrash is not something which quotes verses in context. It only ever quotes verses out of context. That's what Medrash does. Medrash is not proving chastisement of the Messiah from Isaiah 53:5, nor is it proving kingship being taken away from the Messiah in Zechariah 14:2, nor is it proving that the kingship will return to the Messiah from Isaiah 11:4. And in fact, if you were to read from the beginning of this particular Medrash all the way to the end, and it quotes over 20 verses, not a single one of them is in context. And the entire Medrash is based on a verse in Ruth, which has nothing to do with the Messiah. It's a verse in Ruth, where in chapter 2, verse 6, I believe, where it says, "And Boaz said to her, to Ruth, 'Come near to here, take of the bread and dip it in vinegar.' And she sat by on the side of the harvesters. She ate, she was satisfied, and there was some left over." Right? And Rabbi Yochanan, or some versions say Rabbi Yonasan, use this verse in 6 different ways. One talking about King David, one talking about King Solomon, one talking about King Hezekiah, one talking about King Manasseh, one talking about the King Messiah, and the 6th one finally giving the simple understanding, which is about Boaz himself. Right? Clearly, this Medrash is not taking the verses literally, and to try to use it as a proof that the rabbis actually thought Isaiah 53 is about the Messiah is completely absurd, because no rabbis ever thought that Zechariah 14 is about the Messiah. No rabbis ever thought that Isaiah 11:4 is about kingship being restored to the Messiah. Clearly, these verses are being used in exegetical ways, out of context, to illustrate points, like Medrash always does.
Finish?
Yes.
Okay. So I'll keep
Have 2 of those.
So basically, let's just even look at Isaiah 11
Yes.
and highlight why the Jewish perspective is very problematic. Because
Wait, are you
It's-
going to address what I just said?
yeah, I'm going to just one by one. But
Oh, okay.
even with the understanding of the verse, I'll go on to that. It says, the first verse says, "There shall come forth a shoot from the stump of Jesse,
Yes.
and a branch from his roots shall bear fruit." Now, this is the problem that Jewish people have. The verse is very clear that says that the Messiah will come from the line of David. Now, most Jews today do not know their lineage. So when they pick out verses that say, well, this is what the Messiah will do when he comes, one of the criteria within the Tanakh is that he has to come from the line of David.
Hold on, can I ask you something?
Yes.
If he has to come from the line of David, how can he be the son of God?
That is a totally irrelevant and different question. But clearly, here it says, "There shall come forth a shoot from the stump of Jesse, and the branch is also known as the Messiah,"
The Messiah is clearly of regular human lineage.
which
Not
Christ
of divine
was,
conception.
because Christ was born of Mary. Right, so therefore he had a
Leadership
human
goes by
body.
men, goes by the fathers, not by the mothers.
Anyway.
But regardless,
So now, what Josh has said is that when you go into the Midrash, that scholars, the rabbis use different verses to then interpret different things within, so they may not take it literally.
they're illustrating points.
Right. So now, the point is, as I started with my joke, was that there are so many different different understandings of certain verses. So the question again would be, he brought up Isaiah 53. The reason we then have to ask, why would he bring up Isaiah 53 if it was the nation of Israel?
Yes.
Because he's using it as an illustration for a different verse.
Yes.
So the question would be, why is he using it as an illustration?
Yes. The question does indeed exist, but there's no reason to say that he actually thinks that empathy is about that.
Okay.
Now we could ask that on the other rabbinical texts that mention Isaiah 53 that I mentioned before, right? So, for example, the Yerushalmi that I mentioned earlier in Masechet Shkolim 21a. Masechet Shkolim 21a says that quotes Isaiah 53 verse 12 and applies it and says this is talking about Rabbi Akiva. Now obviously no rabbis actually think that Isaiah 53:12 is talking about Rabbi Akiva. Nobody thinks that, right? What's it doing? What's this verse doing? What's this Yerushalmi doing? He is very clearly using this verse to show you to show you the greatness of Rabbi Akiva. He's describing the greatness or illustrating the greatness of Rabbi Akiva by using a verse in Isaiah 53, even though he knows perfectly well Isaiah 53 is not about Rabbi Akiva. And so too in the other places I mentioned, the place that talked about using this to refer to Moshe, even though it's clearly not talking about Moshe. The place that talks in Sifrei, where it quotes it and talks about Pinchas, Phineas, the son of Elazar, when it's clearly not talking about him, right? These are clearly meant not taking it literally. These are not actual interpretations of Isaiah 53. And the one common link that they all have is that they talk about righteous Jews. They're all talking about righteous Jews. Whether it was Moshe, who was the father of the prophets, who in an esoteric sense saw God face to face, right? The only person to ever do such a thing, or whether it is they're comparing it to Pinchas ben Elazar, Phineas the son of Elazar, who God said, I give him my covenant of peace, right? This is the kind of person we're dealing with. Or whether it was Rabbi Akiva, who is considered one of the greatest Tanaic rabbis, right? Or whether it's going to be the Messiah, who's going to be this amazing righteous Jew who's going to bring the world to its perfection, right?
So
this is a very clear common link, and it all fits into what I've said all along, that it talks about the Jewish people and not wicked Jews, obviously actual faithful religious Jews who are servants of God.
Okay, so let me just interject there. So the reason why I'm going through some of these verses is because I want the audience to understand that within the Old Testament you have verses that talk about the Messiah. Now the Christian perspective is these verses, if you accept them, even the verses where some of the rabbis have said they were about the Messiah, if you accept them, they will all point towards Jesus being the Messiah. Because Jews reject some of these verses like Isaiah 53, even though we have rabbis saying that they were about the Messiah, if you reject them, then they will not lead you to Christ, to Jesus as being the Messiah. And then you will take the Jewish position as you will continually be waiting for the Messiah. Now this is the difference. Jesus tells us that the Pharisees followed the tradition of men and they rejected him. So what we are looking at, if we look at it historically, is that there were verses that even rabbis have confirmed or stated that they were about the Messiah. As for example, Jonathan ben Uzziel stated that, put the Messiah in Isaiah 53. There's no rabbinical Jew now who will say this is anything to do with the Messiah. But obviously, if you accepted this verse was about the Messiah, then you would understand it was a prophecy about Christ. And this is why I'm going to go to your favorite now, Isaiah 7:14.
Hold on, before you get to Isaiah 7:14, let me just respond to what you've just said.
Yes.
Because what you've just said is, well, utter nonsense. Because how could you possibly get Jesus being fulfilled in Isaiah 53? Nowhere in Isaiah 53 do we talk about somebody dying. Nowhere in Isaiah 53 do we talk about somebody dying in the land of living, which is the land of living being the land of Israel, as we know from other verses where the land of Israel is called the land of living, right? The Eretz Chaim, the land of living. Jesus died in Israel. He was crucified, and there is no reference to anyone dying for other people or dying for themselves even in Isaiah 53, and no reference to somebody in the land of Israel at all. Clearly it cannot be Jesus. And may I point out that Isaiah 53 talks about Isaiah 52 rather 15 talks about the astonishment of the nations at the success of this servant of God. The only people who are going to be astonished if Jesus turns out to be the Messiah are the Jews. Right? The nations are not going to be surprised in the slightest. The Christians certainly won't. The Muslims certainly won't.
Well,
although, of course, the Christians and Muslims have different definitions of the Messiah.
But that's not an argument, because when Christ does return, the Jews will be stunned. So
but it's talking about the nations, the kings of nations. That's what it says. in 52:14 and 15. That's what it's talking about. It's not talking about the Jewish people there. It says the kings of the nations. Okay, that clearly is not the nation of Israel. Never do we find the plural referring to a singular. Whereas although we find all the way across the Tanakh the singular referring to a collective whole, the plural.
Okay, so let's go
Which of
on.
course is your whole Trinitarian argument.
Because I want to develop this argument about the suffering Messiah. But if we...
What's happening? Oh. This is the times we live in, a police state.
Okay, so...
Oh, yes.
Because what I want to do is go through some of the verses that Christians appeal to establish that these were messianic verses, and because the Jews don't accept them, that they are now waiting for the Messiah. But these are things that predicted Christ, who was the Messiah, who was the fulfillment of these passages. So Isaiah 7:14 says,
Ah, yes, the misquote of Matthew 1:23.
so it says, and I'm sure most people know this verse, and it's quoted in Matthew. It says,
You've never read verse 13,
therefore,
have you?
the Lord himself will give you a sign. Behold, the virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel.
Well, that's a mistranslation. It does not say virgin, and it does not say will conceive. It says young woman, and it says has conceived.
Okay.
This is a mistranslation. And don't try to back it up with Septuagint, because we all know that it uses the same word to refer to Dinah after she was raped, and that does not mean virgin, obviously.
So what he's talking about is that the verse talks about someone who was an Alma. Now
Yes.
the question is, what is an Alma? So if I said to someone, an adolescent child, who here would think that an adolescent child is not a virgin? Because we have to understand, especially within ancient cultures, that... Good, thanks.
Good?
Yep.
Guys, let me explain something to you at this moment in time. Unfortunately, you're in a group larger than 6, so you're breaching
Can we...
legislation.
All right.
Human rights, mate. I'm going to have to ask you to spread out.
Can we just spread out a little bit? Yeah, can we just spread out?
That's split up into different, separate groups, smaller groups.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Groups of 5.
Yeah. Yeah, you can like congregate there and another over there. Yeah. Okay, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to disprove what Josh has said. Because
Of course you are.
let's start with what an understanding of an Alma is. Because in the cultural context, we know within Israelite or even ancient antiquity that most women were deemed as defiled if they had been with another man. So it's commonly traditional that a woman who was of a young maiden would generally be of a virgin. Now, if you can go to
married very young.
Genesis 20.
In the 20s, yes, correct. In Parshas Chayei Sarah, you're going to bring Rebecca.
Yes.
Of course you are.
So can we go to that 14?
Sure. It's not going to prove what you think it's going to
Okay.
prove. Because you will have to deal with why Isaiah 7 does not
Yeah.
say the word basulah when what it really
That's fine.
Right? You're going to have
So
to deal with
because
that.
there's two words for virgins. Oh,
There's
sorry,
only one
a
word
word
for
for virgin, Bethula. Now let's go to what's it?
All right. Genesis chapter 24.
14.
14. My mitzvah parsha, this says, "V'choyoha na'aro, and asher omar eleho hatinoch hatek v'eshter v'omar shesei v'gam g'malecho ashker, osa hochachton avdechu liyitzchok v'o'ira ki osisu chesed m'adoni." It says, and the girl to whom I shall say, "Let down my pitcher, I pray thee, that I may drink," and she shall say, "Drink, and I will give thy camels drink also."
Yeah.
Let her be that thou hast appointed for thy servant Yitzchok, and thereby shall I know that he had done speaking.
Okay.
No,
what
that's the next bit, that's the
what
next
was
bit.
the verse used in 14?
Na'aro.
Na'ara. Okay. Now continue to 15.
Okay. Vayihu terem kilo ladaber, v'hinei Rivka yotzes asher yulod olev sfeil ben milko eishes nocho achi Avraham, v'chadoch al shechmo. That's verse 15.
16.
Verse 16. V'hanaro tevas marim ma'od b'silo v'ish lo yodoch v'teret ha'ein v'atmalich hadoch v'atoel. So here it calls her a virgin.
Okay,
Correct.
continue.
And then it says, "Vayoto evers lekosoch, vayomagvini no matmai mechadech." This doesn't help you. But
Translates your go.
don't worry. People can look in the English. Soko always put it up, and my viewers will probably know what this is. You really want me to be reading from verse. Let's have a look. You really want me to skip now to where it actually calls her an Almo later on, which is
43.
all the way in verse
43.
43. There we are. So verse 43 says,
Okay.
All right. And here it calls her an Almo. So we
Thank
have
you.
her called
So-
by all three things.
so-
She was A, an Naro, B,
Thank you
a
very
Basula,
much.
and C, an Almo.
So my point was this, that Josh has just confirmed. I said to you, if someone is an adolescent, would we expect them to not be a virgin? Most in society would know an adolescent person would generally be a virgin. Some cultures they wouldn't be. But I've gone to this verse in Genesis, which attributes 3 different words.
Three
to
different words.
Exactly, but she was a virgin, it confirms. It uses the word Bethela.
Bethel
So
was
it's using
a virgin.
Alma in conjunction with Bethela. So therefore she was a young maiden, but my point was this. If someone is a young maiden, they would generally be presumed to be a virgin. So yes, they are different words, but because of the cultural context, we know that yes, someone can be a young maiden, but generally, because people did not like sleep around or anything, you would be of young marrying in age, that generally you would be a virgin. That's why it uses 3 different qualifiers for this same person. Now my question would be to you, can you give me a verse where it uses Alma to clearly demonstrate someone who is not a virgin?
Yes, Proverbs chapter 30.
Okay, let's go there.
I'm sure you've heard this before,
Okay,
of course.
let's go to Proverbs chapter 30.
Big battery check.
All right.
Look at our verse, Proverbs 30.